I have permission to say a word I wouldn't usually say on the radio, but this comes from a journalist friend of ours at Holyrood, quoting a Scottish Greens source saying they, that is the SNP, they have shat it.
And the ending of the power-sharing deal between the SNP and the Scottish Greens after the Greens walked out over the decision to water down Green targets. The pair have been in a coalition since 2021. We're speaking just in the last few moments. Here is the SNP First Minister, Humza Yousaf, setting out what's happened.
Cooperation in any sphere of life is, almost by definition, a trade-off, one which the benefits of working together are held up against the limitations of compromise. And when it comes to our agreement with the Scottish Green Party, I believe that the benefits have outweighed the compromises. When I said that the agreement was worth its weight in gold, I meant it. However, it is now my judgment that the balance has shifted.
The balance has shifted. Well, let's speak to Times Radio's Callum MacDonald now, close observer of all things Scottish politics. Callum, just explain who's walked out on who.
Yeah, so the Bute House Agreement has been brought to an end by Humza Yousaf and the SNP. Now, that is because, or it feels like it's because, the Scottish Greens were going to hold an emergency general meeting to reevaluate whether they wanted to stay in the Bute House Agreement. We were expecting actually to get the exact date of that today, and it was due to be held at some point in the next few weeks. However, obviously, that is no more. So the question in the build-up to this moment today has been who's going to dump who, basically. It reached that point where it felt like there was no way back for the Bute House Agreement, despite, by the way, what Humza Yousaf has been saying over the last couple of days, where he's kind of stood by it. It's interesting that he says there, and says this morning in this press conference, that it no longer gives stability. Arguably, there hasn't been stability within the Bute House Agreement for quite some time. Some of the most controversial, difficult and provocative issues of policy at Holyrood have been inspired by the Greens being in government with the SNP. So some of the sort of classics, the highly protected marine areas, which critics said would decimate fishing in Scotland, a crucial part of Scotland's economy, the deposit return scheme, which collapsed in a heap. The CAS review was another flashpoint just in the last couple of weeks, where the Scottish Greens partners in the Scottish government said they didn't really accept the findings of the CAS review. They were pretty sceptical of the findings on it when it came to the medicalisation of children using puberty blockers, etc. So the stability, I'm not sure the stability's existed for a long time. Now, the crucial thing with this is whether Humza Yousaf captures this as a moment to reset. Let's also bear in mind, he was the only candidate in the race to replace Nicola Sturgeon. He was the only candidate who stood on a platform of keeping the Bute House Agreement. He extolled its virtues during that contest. So there is a credibility question for Humza Yousaf, as well as for Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater, the co-leaders of the Scottish Greens, who I have to say, Matt, have been absolutely excoriating of the First Minister this morning. A couple of lines from Lorna Slater's statement. This is an act of political cowardice by the SNP, who are selling out future generations to appease the most reactionary forces in the country. By ending the agreement in such a weak and thoroughly hopeless way, Humza Yousaf has signalled that when it comes to political cooperation, he can no longer be trusted. And I have permission to say a word I wouldn't usually say on the radio, but this comes from a journalist friend of ours at Holyrood, quoting a Scottish Greens source saying they, that is the SNP, they have shat it.
Good Lord. Good Lord. Who knew people in politics could be so potty-mouthed, Callum? So what happens now in terms of what the SNP can realistically do to get back on the front foot at a time when they're neck and neck with the Labour Party in general election polling? And it's some way off before there's Holyrood elections. What realistically can Humza Yousaf now achieve day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I've been looking at the numbers on this because the coalition agreement was kind of based, let's be real, on the idea of independence, to give an independence majority at Holyrood. Now, I think it's fair to say, objectively, pragmatically, that the routes towards an independence referendum are pretty much closed at this point. So there were questions about the sort of veracity of the coalition agreement in an independence context anyway. So that's that bit. Then it comes to how Holyrood can function. So when the Bute House Agreement was struck, here are the numbers. The SNP was tied with opposition parties, so it was 64-64. Since then, Ash Regan, who stood against Humza Yousaf for SNP leader, has defected to the Alba party. So the SNP are now outnumbered. They have 63-65 when you combine the opposition parties and numbers of MSPs. Now, minority government is how Holyrood was actually designed to function. Way back when. It's 25 years since the Parliament was established, since devolution began. And so there is something of a return to that. Now, there are questions, of course, as to confidence issues. For example, passing a budget. In the previous minority or a previous minority government chapter under Alex Salmond from 2007, there was an informal cooperation agreement with the Scottish Conservatives, which got things like budgets over the finish line. So whether the opposition parties now round on the SNP in some sort of undermining confidence in the government and its ability to function, and indeed its ability to govern, remains to be seen. But I think that's a question for opposition parties today. Just to mention as well, I've mentioned Ash Regan, who stood against Humza Yousaf. I just want to give you her reaction and then Kate Forbes' reaction. These were the three contenders just over a year ago. Ash Regan says, 48 hours ago, I put a motion of no confidence in against Patrick Harvey, co-leader of the Scottish Greens. Today, the government have agreed. I'm glad to see the extremely unpopular politics of the Greens have been abandoned and the SNP have found a backbone. And this from Kate Forbes. As the First Minister has terminated the Bute House Agreement, I firmly believe the Scottish Parliament is strongest when there is thorough public debate. The government is most effective when its priorities match the public's, and the SNP is most electable as a broad tent representative of the nation.
Thanks so much for that. Callum MacDonald there, Times Radio's very own Callum MacDonald, who'll be back with Times Radio Breakfast tomorrow morning from 6 o'clock, when I no doubt this will still be dominating the news. Well, just before we came on air, I caught up with the former leader of the Scottish Greens, Robin Harper, who quit the party last year. I asked him how bad this coalition experiment coming to an end will be for the Greens.
I think it's pretty bad for them, and it's not bad in terms of the idea of cooperating with another party. They've tried it, but they haven't taken the right approach. They've been far too combative. They have taken a leaf out of the SNP book, the one that they didn't need to do, which is to be in competition more than cooperation over the development of nearly everything they've been doing. We wouldn't have this awful mess about the gender dysphoria business if we'd been in cooperation with Westminster. We wouldn't have had the dreadful mess over the recycling if we'd been in cooperation, particularly with Northern England, but generally speaking with recycling in England. You can just go through the list of almost everything they've tried to do. If they'd been willing to cooperate or even initiate cooperation with other people in the same field, we'd be in a different place to the one we are at the moment. I don't think ending the Bute House Agreement will make a blind bit of difference to Scotland, except that we will have a severely weakened governance of Scotland for the foreseeable future, with the SNP having to cooperate with the rest of Parliament to get anything done. This might be a very good thing.
I wonder whether, you know, when we saw what happened in the coalition government in Westminster, it was the smaller party, the Lib Dems, ultimately got done in, well, eventually by the electorate. Is it just smaller parties, progressive parties who like the idea of coalitions and parties working together and so on? We just haven't got our head around that in any part of the country, that it's always the smaller party which loses out?
I would not want to draw such a broad generalisation as that, because the Greens up and down in the United Kingdom are, I think, working pretty well with other parties at the local council level.
Interesting.
And the only reason one of the reasons that we don't hear so much about it is that, generally speaking, local council politics aren't high up in the news agenda. It's sad that, and it would be even better if local councils in England and Wales and Scotland had a bit more money to spend. And then I think we'd probably get an even higher level of cooperation. So I don't think we should take the lesson that we're getting in the Scottish Parliament or from Westminster too seriously. What we should be looking at as what isn't really working at local council level, up and down in the country.
Now, you left the Scottish Greens, in August last year because of your differences with them over their direction. What would you like to see happen in Scotland, whether at the next Holyrood elections or even at the general election?
Well, first of all, we should carry on at the local level on building some of the very good work that the Green Party has been doing at a local level. I think where national politics are concerned, we need to take a bit of we're going to be taking a bit of a back seat and regroup, elect a new leadership who are dedicated to working with and cooperating with organisations that it's sensible to work with down south and build on the lessons which I hope we have taken. I should say. I left the party in August. I can't get out of the habit of saying we when I'm talking positively about the party. They need time to think, and that's not what they got. I campaigned very quietly in the background. I don't have a huge say in Scottish politics any longer. But when asked, I said we should be delaying anything on Gibbs until we saw the CAS report, because we had no real science to study until it was reported. And then the parties, the leadership's reaction to the CAS report, I had to be almost in tears of frustration that anybody could come out and categorise what I think is going to turn out to be a world leader in terms of getting research together from across the board, sorting out the wheat from the chaff, and those pieces of research that stand up to scrutiny in scientific terms. This is what CAS has done, and it could be, should be, and must be of enormous importance to what we're doing to tackle the problems that are around gender identity.
And just finally, Robin, I think you said last year you'd vote Labour at the next general election. Is that still the case?
Oh, absolutely the case, yes.
Robin Harper there, former leader of the Scottish Greens, who quit the party last year over differences over the direction of it. And now, as we've seen, they have left the Bute House Agreement with the SNP.